On my first day working the night shift at that gas station, I was mostly worried about looking dumb. I was 19. I'd worked fast food before, but this felt different because it was quieter and you were alone for longer stretches. It was a small place off a 2-lane road, more trucks than cars, and not much around it except fields and a few dark shapes of houses set back from the road. The manager, Keith, walked me through everything like he'd done it 100 times. Register, cigarette IDs, lottery machine, how to reset the pumps if the card reader glitches. He showed me where they kept the mop and the spill kit and the box of old keys that didn't open anything anymore. He also showed me the front door. It was glass with a metal frame and a cheap buzzer that made a dull sound when it worked. There was a lock at the top and one of those extra slide bolts lower down. Keith pointed at it with his finger and said, "After 10, don't unlock the door for anyone." He didn't say it like a scary story. He said it like, "Don't forget to clock out." Like it was just the policy, no conversation needed. I nodded and said, "Even if they say it's an emergency?" He looked at me for a second like he was deciding how honest to be. Then he said, "They can talk through the window. If it's real, they can call someone. You don't unlock that door." Then he moved on. Showed me the night window, the little drawer you slide out, the button under the counter that calls the sheriff's office. He tapped it once with the back of his hand and said, "Don't play with that." I didn't ask why. I didn't want to sound nervous. I was trying to be the guy who could handle it. The first part of the shift was normal. People came in for energy drinks, cigarettes, snacks. A couple of older guys played lottery and lingered. A woman with 2 kids used the bathroom and bought a bag of ice. A trucker asked me if the air pump worked, like I would have any control over it. Around 9, it got quiet in the way rural places do. Not dead, just spaced out. You get 10 minutes with no one, then someone pulls in, then nothing again. Keith left before 10. He did the money drop into the safe, made me count my drawer twice, and watched me lock the front door. He stood by the door while I slid the bolt and then tried the handle from the inside to make sure it wasn't opening. "Good," he said. "Don't mess with that lock. Just use the window." He walked out, got in his truck, and drove off. I watched his taillights disappear down the road and felt a small rush of pride that I was running the place now, even if it was just a gas station. After that, I settled into the night routine. Wiped the counters, checked the bathrooms, restocked the cooler. I kept looking up at the security monitor because it was new to me, and the little camera views made the store feel more supervised than it actually was. At some point, I realized how loud the building was when there were no customers. The hum of the drink cooler, the buzz of the lights, the ice machine cycling on and off. Small sounds that you don't notice when you're busy. I was wiping down the coffee area when I heard the first knock. Not on the night window, on the front door. It wasn't pounding, just a firm knock. 3 times. I stood there with the rag in my hand and looked at the door. Most people used the window once the door was locked. There were signs on the glass. They weren't fancy, just printed paper taped up, but you'd have to ignore them completely to miss them. I walked over and looked through the glass. A man was standing slightly to the side, not centered in front of the door. He was close enough that I could see his face, but the overhead lights outside didn't hit him evenly. He looked like he was in his 30s or 40s, wearing a hoodie with the hood down. His hands were low, near his pockets. He leaned toward the glass and said something. I couldn't hear it through the door. I pointed at the night window and lifted my chin toward it, like, "Use that." He shook his head quickly and knocked again, harder this time. I went behind the counter and opened the night window a few inches. "You need to use the window," I said. He stepped toward it but stopped short, like he didn't want to be fully in the light that came from the window area. "My car broke down," he said. "Phone's dead. I need to call someone. Just for a second." His voice sounded normal, not slurred, more irritated than anything. "We don't let anyone in after 10, I said. "Come on," he said. "Look at me. I'm not trying to rob you. I just need to use a phone." "We don't have a phone customers can use," I said, which wasn't completely true. There was a store phone, but we weren't supposed to hand it over. He shifted his weight and looked past me into the store, like he was checking how far I was from the door. "Then let me charge mine," he said. 5 minutes. I can't, I said. He stared at me for a second, then stepped closer to the window. Man, I'm stuck out here. My car's right there. He pointed, not toward the pumps, but toward the darker side of the lot where the light didn't reach well. I couldn't see a car from where I was standing. If it was there, it was out of the camera's main view too. Can you call someone for me? He asked. I hesitated. That sounded reasonable. It sounded like something I should do. I thought about the button under the counter and decided I didn't want to hit it for a stranded guy. I also didn't want to tell him no and have him get mad and start causing problems outside. Who do you need to call? I asked. He gave me a number quickly, too quickly, like he had it memorized. I repeated it back, and he corrected me on one digit immediately without thinking. That stuck with me in the moment, but not enough to make me shut the window. I turned and picked up the store phone. When I looked down at it, my brain did this stupid slow thing where it tried to remember if we were allowed to dial out for customers. I knew Keith would say no. I also knew I was alone. I started dialing anyway. While I was dialing, the man moved away from the window and walked back toward the front door. I paused with the receiver in my hand and watched him. He stood right up against the glass now and looked in. He raised his voice so I could hear it through the door. Just open it. It's cold. I'll stand right there. You can watch me. I held the phone and said, use the window. I can't hear you through that thing, he said, which was nonsense. We were talking fine. He leaned in toward the door, close enough that his breath fogged a small patch of glass. Just crack it, he said. I'm not asking you to leave it open. I should have stopped right there. I should have put the receiver down and told him to step away and call someone else. Instead, I did what I'd been doing all shift, which was trying to be reasonable. I walked over to the door. I didn't unlock it. I kept my hand on the top lock and looked at him through the glass. He said, quieter now, please. My car's dead. I'm not from here. I don't know why that mattered to me. Maybe because I was thinking of myself being stranded somewhere and needing help. Maybe because I didn't want to be the guy who refused someone and then heard later that something happened to them. I slid the top lock open halfway, just enough that the door could move a couple inches, but not enough for someone to step in. I kept my foot close to the bottom of the door, ready to hold it. The moment the seal broke, he shoved. Not a push like someone testing it. He put his whole body into it. The door came toward me fast, and the edge hit my shoe hard enough that I felt it in my ankle. I threw my shoulder into the door and shoved back using my weight. His face changed. The stranded guy looked dropped. His eyes were fixed on the gap like that was all he cared about. I yelled something I don't remember clearly. Probably stop or get back. It came out loud and ugly. He shoved again. The metal frame creaked. I jammed my foot harder and leaned my shoulder into it. My hands were on the inside handle, trying to pull it shut while also pushing with my body. It felt stupid, like a tug of war with a door. I heard a scuffing sound down low near the bottom corner of the frame, like something scraping the concrete right outside the door. I didn't look down. I didn't want to take my eyes off the gap. The man stopped pushing and pulled back half a step. He stared through the crack, breathing hard, and then he said, like he was annoyed, "Come on." I backed away just enough to reach the slide bolt and slammed it over with my free hand. The door shifted in the frame and settled. I twisted the top lock back into place. The man hit the glass with the flat of his hand once, then he stepped away. He didn't run, he didn't shout. He walked out of the light toward the darker side of the lot, the direction he'd pointed earlier. I stayed by the door with both hands on it, waiting for him to come back and hit it again. I listened for footsteps on the concrete outside. I didn't hear anything. I went behind the counter and picked up the phone again. I didn't call the number he gave me. I didn't even look at it. I hit the sheriff's office button under the counter. My voice sounded wrong when they answered. Too fast. I told them someone tried to force the door. I gave the address. I said I was alone. They asked what the man looked like. I described him as best as I could. Hoodie, average build, maybe mid-30s, no clear facial hair that I remembered. I kept looking at the monitor while I talked. The camera outside showed the pumps and part of the lot. The man didn't cross through the camera's view again. The darker side of the lot was just off the edge. A deputy showed up after what felt like a long time, but I'm not going to pretend I know exactly how long it was. I stayed behind the counter the entire time, watching the door, watching the lot, replaying the shove in my head and the way the door moved against my foot. When the deputy arrived, he knocked on the glass, held up his badge, and I didn't unlock the door. I made him come to the night window. He didn't seem offended. He looked more tired than anything. I told him what happened. He asked if the man got inside. I said no. He walked around the building with his flashlight while I watched on the monitor. He came back and said, "Did you see anybody else?" I told him no. He nodded and said, "You did the right thing not letting him in." After he left, I called Keith. I didn't want to, but I knew the cameras would show I unlocked the door, and I wanted him to hear it from me instead of finding it later. He didn't yell. That surprised me. He asked me if I was okay. Then he said, "When I told you that rule, I meant it." "I know," I said. He told me to finish the shift and he'd come in early. I didn't want to be there alone again, but I also didn't want to abandon the place and have him deal with a mess. I stayed. I kept the night window open only when someone pulled up, and I watched everyone's hands. The next day, Keith pulled up the security footage with me in the back office. The outside camera didn't show the whole door area clearly. It was angled slightly toward the pumps. You could see the man step toward the door. You could see my shadow through the glass. You could see the door move. Then Keith paused it and rewound. "Look," he said. At the bottom edge of the frame, right outside the door, there was movement low to the ground. At first, it looked like a shadow shifting. Then it resolved into a person crouched down near the door frame, pressed close to the wall, staying below the camera's view line. You couldn't see their face. You could see part of their shoulder and the top of their head, and you could see them shift when the door cracked open, like they were ready to move in. That scuffing sound I'd heard made sense immediately. Keith didn't say anything for a few seconds. He just watched the footage again. Then he leaned back in his chair and rubbed his forehead like he had a headache. "That's why," he said. I didn't answer because I didn't know what to say that didn't sound stupid. He told me I could switch to day shifts if I wanted. He said it like an offer, not like a favor. I took it. I finished out my 2 weeks, but I didn't work nights again. Every time I went in after that, I caught myself looking at the bottom corner of the front door, like I expected to see someone's shoulder there, tucked out of view. I don't know what they planned to do if the door had opened wider. I don't know if they would have grabbed the register or grabbed me or just rushed the place and left. I didn't get an answer for any of that. I just know how quickly that man stopped sounding like a stranded driver the second the door moved. I started my plumbing apprenticeship later than most guys. I was 34, coming off warehouse work and trying to get into something steadier. I didn't grow up around tools the way some of the younger guys did, so I made up for it by being early, carrying everything, and not complaining. It was my first week riding night calls with my supervisor, Mark. He'd been doing plumbing for over 20 years and treated most problems like they were minor inconveniences. Clogged drains, busted lines, flooded laundry rooms. He'd seen all of it. That night in November, we were finishing up a job in Knoxville when the office called him. He looked at his phone and said, "Another one." He answered, listened for about 30 seconds, and then said, "Yeah, we'll head that way." When he hung up, I asked what it was. "Backed up sink," he said. "Lady says it's overflowing. Probably just grease." "What time is it?" I asked. He glanced at the dash. 9. I didn't say anything else. I was still trying to be the guy who didn't mind late jobs. As we drove, he added, "Rural address. Probably nothing. We'll be in and out." He said it in a way that closed the subject. The directions took us off the main road and onto narrower 2-lane stretches with trees tight on both sides. The GPS signal dipped in and out, and Mark swore at it once before it corrected itself. The house was at the end of a long gravel driveway. No neighboring houses close by. Trees on either side, thick enough that you couldn't see much beyond the property line. What I noticed first was the lack of exterior lights. No porch light, no garage light, just the headlights from our van lighting up the front of the house. "People never turn on lights when they call for help," Mark muttered as he put the van in park. The front door opened before we even knocked. A man stood there, probably mid-50s, average build, wearing jeans and a long-sleeve shirt. He didn't look panicked or flustered. He looked steady. "Plumbing?" he asked. "Yeah," Mark said. "You called about a sink?" The man nodded and stepped back, but not far. He didn't open the door wide. He angled his body like he was controlling how much space we had to enter. "It's down in the basement," he said. "Kitchen sink?" Mark asked. "No," the man said. "Basement utility sink." That wasn't unusual, but most of the time people start with the kitchen or bathroom. A basement sink call at 9 at night felt less common. "All right," Mark said. "Show us." We stepped inside. The house was clean but dim. Lamps on in a couple of rooms, but the overhead lights were off. It didn't feel lived in the usual way. No TV noise, no music, just the sound of our boots on the floor. The man led us past the kitchen without stopping and toward a door at the end of the hallway. "Down here," he said, opening it. The basement stairs were narrow and steep. Wood steps, painted at some point, but worn down the middle. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling below, already on. Mark stopped at the top of the stairs and looked at me. "Go take a look," he said. "See what we're dealing with. I'll grab the bigger auger from the van." That was normal. He liked to make me do the first assessment so I'd learn. I nodded and started down the steps with my smaller tool bag over my shoulder. As I descended, I could feel the air change slightly. Basements always feel different from the rest of a house. Cooler, more enclosed. The sink was at the far end of the basement, against a concrete wall. There was a washing machine nearby and some shelves with storage boxes. No water on the floor, no obvious overflow. I set my bag down and turned on the faucet. The water drained slowly but not dramatically. It wasn't backing up over the rim. It looked like a minor clog at worst. I heard the basement door close behind me. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe the man shut it to keep warm air in the house. Maybe Mark had stepped out already and pulled it shut on his way. I ran the faucet again and crouched down to look at the trap. After a minute, I decided I should tell Mark it didn't look urgent. I walked back toward the stairs. The basement door was closed. I climbed the first few steps and reached for the handle. There wasn't one. On the basement side, it was just a flat panel, no knob, no latch, just wood. I paused and pressed my palm against it. It didn't move. I pushed harder. Nothing. I knocked once, lightly. "Mark?" No answer. I knocked again, louder. "Hey, can you open this?" Silence for a few seconds, then footsteps upstairs. The door opened. The homeowner stood there, not Mark. "Oh," he said, like he'd forgotten I was down there. "Did it shut?" "Yeah," I said. "There's no handle on this side." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Old house," he said. "Door sticks." He stepped aside, but he didn't open it fully. I had to squeeze past him slightly to get up the last few steps. Mark was just coming back in from outside, carrying the larger tool. "Everything good?" he asked me. "Yeah," I said automatically. "Doesn't look too bad." I didn't mention the door. I don't know why. Maybe because it had opened easily once he was there. Maybe because I didn't want to sound like I couldn't handle a door. The homeowner led us back toward the basement again. "Still draining slow," he said. "I don't want it getting worse overnight." Mark gestured for me to head down again. This time, I hesitated for half a second. "You want to come with?" I asked. He looked at me like I'd asked something unnecessary. "You're fine. I'll be right here." I went down again. The light bulb flickered once as I reached the bottom. I told myself that was just wiring. I knelt by the sink and started loosening the trap. Halfway through, I heard the basement door close again. The sound was heavier this time. I stood up immediately and walked back toward the stairs. I climbed them faster than before and pressed against the door. It didn't move. I knocked harder. "Mark?" No response. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and tried to call him. The screen showed no service. I moved it higher, like that would help. Still nothing. I hit the door with my fist. Mark. Footsteps above. Slow. The door opened a few inches. The homeowner's face appeared in the gap. "You okay down there?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Door shut again. He opened it wider, smiling like we were sharing a small inconvenience. "Sorry about that," he said. I stepped up past him again, this time not slowing down. Mark was standing near the kitchen entrance. "Trap clogged?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I can clear it." He nodded toward the basement. "Go ahead." I looked at him for a second. "The door doesn't have a handle on the inside," I said. He shrugged. "Old houses are like that." The homeowner watched us, hands at his sides. I didn't want to argue. I didn't want to look paranoid. I also didn't want to go back down there alone. "I'll need you to hold the door," I said finally. Mark sighed like I was being overly cautious, but he walked over and stood near the top of the stairs. I went down for the third time. This time I kept my eyes on the doorway as much as I could while I worked. I cleared the clog quickly. It was minor, like I'd thought from the start. When I finished, I packed my tools up fast and headed back upstairs. The door stayed open because Mark was there. We tested the sink together. It drained fine. The homeowner paid in cash. Exact amount. He handed it to Mark without looking at me. "Appreciate you coming out so late," he said. "No problem," Mark replied. We walked out to the van. I didn't say anything until we were halfway down the driveway. "That basement door," I said. "What about it?" Mark asked. "There's no handle on the inside." So if it shuts, you're stuck." He shrugged again. "Then don't let it shut." I looked back toward the house. It was already dark again, no lights visible from the driveway. "You heard him close it, right?" I asked. Mark didn't answer right away. "He probably didn't think about it," he said finally. "People are weird about their houses." I let it go because I needed the job, but I didn't volunteer for night calls after that. And when I did end up in basements later on, I made sure the door stayed open, even if I had to wedge my tool bag in the frame. I never found out why that door didn't have a handle on the inside. I just know that the second time it shut, it didn't feel accidental. I took the overnight front desk job because it paid a little more, and I figured nights would be quiet. I'd worked customer service before. I knew how to smile, check IDs, and apologize for things that weren't my fault. This felt like a step up. A small hotel in Spokane, nothing fancy, but clean and steady. My first overnight training shift was on a Tuesday in February. Snow had been coming down off and on all week, and the parking lot had that gray slush packed into the corners where the plows couldn't reach. The manager, Carla, walked me through the basics before she left. "Night audit's simple," she said. "Run the report at 2. Print backups. Don't comp anything without writing it down." She pointed at the keycard drawer, the petty cash envelope, the binder with emergency procedures. Then she looked at me directly. "And don't leave the desk unattended overnight," she said it once. Not dramatic, not like a warning from a movie, just a policy. "If someone needs towels," I asked, "have housekeeping bring them up in the morning," she said. "If there's a real emergency, you call maintenance or 911. You stay at the desk." I nodded. That sounded reasonable. The desk was the center of everything. Phones, cameras, keycards, guest files. She showed me the camera monitor mounted under the counter. 4 small screens. Lobby, front entrance, parking lot, back hallway near the storage and laundry rooms. "The back hallway sensor is touchy," she added. "Sometimes the fire panel chirps back there. Don't go chasing ghosts. Call me if it keeps happening." She said that like she'd dealt with it before. By 11, she was gone, and it was just me and the hum of the lobby heater. The first couple of hours were slow but normal. A late check-in around midnight, a guy asking for extra pillows, a phone call from a room about the Wi-Fi cutting out. I kept glancing at the camera monitor because it made me feel like I was doing something active, even when nothing was happening. Around 1:30, the lobby was empty. The automatic doors hadn't opened in a while. Snow drifted sideways across the entrance when the wind picked up. I started the night audit process early, double-checking room charges and scrolling through the software slowly so I didn't miss anything. At 1:57 a.m., the fire panel behind the desk gave a short, sharp chirp. Not the full alarm, not the building-wide siren, just a warning tone. I looked up at it. The small screen showed back hallway sensor. I stared at it for a few seconds, waiting for it to clear. It didn't. Another chirp. I looked at the camera monitor. The back hallway feed showed the usual. Laundry carts, closed supply doors, the door to the rear exit. No smoke, no visible movement. I remembered what Carla said. Don't go chasing ghosts. Another chirp. I imagined ignoring it and having something actually be wrong back there. A dryer overheating. A small fire starting behind a door I couldn't see into. I picked up the desk phone and considered calling maintenance. Then I realized I didn't have a direct number for them after hours. Carla had mentioned it once, but hadn't written it down yet. The panel chirped again. I told myself I'd just walk back there, take a look, and come right back. 30 seconds. I stepped out from behind the desk and hesitated, looking at the front entrance. The automatic doors were closed. The lobby was empty. I walked toward the back hallway. The carpet changed from lobby pattern to a plain industrial runner as I turned the corner. The lighting back there was harsher, brighter, but less warm. The fire panel at the end of the hall blinked red near the ceiling. I walked halfway down and stopped, listening. Nothing. No crackling, no smell of smoke, no unusual heat in the air. I reached the end of the hall and looked up at the sensor mounted near the ceiling. It wasn't obviously damaged. The panel gave one more chirp, then went silent. I stood there another few seconds, feeling slightly foolish for leaving the desk over what looked like nothing. Then I turned around and walked back. As I rounded the corner into the lobby, I saw someone standing behind the front desk. Not in front of it, behind it. He was on the employee side, near the filing cabinet where we kept personnel records and incident reports. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't grabbing things and stuffing them into a bag. He was holding a folder open and looking down at it. For a second, my brain tried to categorize him as a coworker I hadn't met yet. Then I realized I was the only one scheduled. "Hey," I said automatically. He looked up. He was maybe mid-30s, average height, wearing a dark jacket. His expression didn't change when he saw me. No surprise, no embarrassment. We just looked at each other across the open space of the desk. "What are you doing?" I asked. My voice sounded steady, which surprised me. He closed the folder gently and set it back in the drawer. He didn't slam it. He didn't hide it. He just placed it down. He stepped sideways, moving out from behind the desk area as if he had every right to be there. "You can't be back there," I said. He didn't answer. He walked around the end of the desk, passing within a few feet of me. I was standing near the corner between him and the front entrance. For a second, I thought he might try to push past me. He didn't. He adjusted his path slightly, giving me space, and headed straight for the automatic doors. They slid open as he approached. Cold air rushed in. He stepped out into the snow and walked across the parking lot at a normal pace. Not running, not looking back. I stood there watching him through the glass until he disappeared past the row of parked cars. Then I looked down at the desk. The drawer with the employee files was slightly open. I stepped behind the desk and pulled it out fully. Folders were shifted out of order. A couple of them were tilted, like someone had flipped through them quickly. Mine was on top. I'd filled out my paperwork earlier that week. I looked toward the back hallway. The fire panel screen was blank again. I walked back to the desk phone and called Carla. She answered on the third ring, voice thick with sleep. "There was someone behind the desk," I said. She went quiet immediately. "What do you mean behind the desk?" I left for maybe a minute because the fire panel was chirping. When I came back, he was going through the employee files. "Did he take anything?" "I don't think so." "Are you safe right now?" "Yes." "Lock the front doors manually," she said, "and call the police." I did both. When the officer arrived, he asked me to describe the man. I did my best. Dark jacket, medium build, short hair, no visible facial hair, calm. He walked the lobby and checked the back hallway. There were no forced entry marks on the front doors, no broken locks. "How long were you gone from the desk?" he asked. "Less than a minute," I said. He nodded, but didn't comment on it. Carla came in early that morning. She reviewed the camera footage with me in the office. The front entrance camera showed the man entering the lobby at 1:58 a.m., just after I'd turned the corner into the back hallway. He walked straight toward the desk. No hesitation. The back hallway camera showed nothing unusual. No visible smoke. No one back there. The fire panel log showed a brief signal from the hallway sensor at 1:57 a.m. Carla leaned back in her chair. "That rule about not leaving the desk?" she said quietly. I nodded. She didn't say anything else about it. I finished the shift, but I didn't sit back down in the chair the same way. I stayed standing more than usual, hands on the counter, watching the doors. I worked 2 more overnight shifts after that. Then I asked to move to evenings. Carla didn't argue. I finished trade school in the spring of 2022 and started with a cable and internet company a few weeks later. I was proud of the certificate. I'd worked hard for it, and I liked being able to say I knew how to terminate a line properly and troubleshoot signal loss without guessing. Being one of the only women in my class meant I got used to people watching me a little closer. Some customers were surprised. Some were supportive. Some acted like I was there to hold the ladder while someone else did the real work. By June, I was still considered a trainee, but I was running installs on my own with a supervisor on call if I needed help. That afternoon, dispatch sent me an address in a suburban part of Mesa. The note on the ticket said, "Customer specifically requested female technician." I stared at that line longer than I meant to. I called dispatch and asked about it. The dispatcher, Marlene, said, "Yeah, he's asked before. Some clients are just picky about who comes into their house. Don't take it personally." "Why?" I asked. "Did he have an issue?" She hesitated for a second. "He's just particular. Get in, get it done, get out." That wasn't exactly reassuring, but I didn't want to be the new hire who rejected jobs for vague reasons. It was around 3 p.m. when I pulled up. The neighborhood looked normal. Single-story homes, trimmed lawns, cars and driveways. Nothing about it stood out. What did stand out was how dark his house looked compared to the others. The blinds were drawn tight. No visible lights on inside, even though the sun was still high. I parked in the driveway and grabbed my tool bag and ladder from the van. Before I knocked, I did what I'd been trained to do. Check my phone signal, note the house number, make sure my van was positioned so I could leave without backing into the street. The door opened almost immediately after I knocked. The man standing there was probably in his 40s. Clean clothes, glasses, hair neatly cut. He looked like someone you'd see at a grocery store and not remember 5 minutes later. "You're the technician?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I said, "here for the internet installation." He looked past me at the van and then back at me. "I'm glad they sent you," he said. "I don't like having strange men in my house." I forced a polite smile. "I'll try to make it quick." He stepped aside, but not fully. I had to angle myself to get past him into the entryway. The inside of the house was dim, curtains drawn, a few lamps on, but no overhead lights. "Where would you like the router set up?" I asked. "In the bedroom," he said immediately. "That's where I need the strongest signal." I glanced toward the living room where a TV sat against the wall. "We usually install in a common area," I said. "Living room or office. It gives better coverage." "No," he said. "Bedroom." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't smile either. I checked the ticket again on my tablet. It didn't specify a location. "Is there an existing wall plate in the bedroom?" I asked. "Yes," he said. "I had service before." That at least made it plausible. "Okay," I said. "I'll need access to that outlet." He led me down a hallway. The doors along it were closed. I noticed that without meaning to. The bedroom was at the end. It was small, bed against one wall, dresser on the other. The window blinds were down, even though it faced the backyard. "There," he said, pointing to a wall plate near the corner. I set my tool bag down near the door and brought the ladder in. Company policy said to keep yourself between the exit and the customer when possible. In tight spaces, that wasn't always practical. In this room, the only workable position for the ladder put my back partially toward the hallway. I climbed up and started removing the wall plate. He stood near the foot of the bed, watching. "You've done this long?" he asked. "A few months," I said. "You live around here?" "I work around here," I said. He didn't laugh. I focused on the wiring. The coax line looked intact. I attached my tester and waited for the signal reading. Behind me, I heard the bedroom door move. It wasn't loud, just a soft shift and the click of it settling into the frame. I turned my head slightly. The hallway door was closed. "Did you shut that?" I asked. "It drifts," he said. "I hadn't noticed any airflow when I came in." The air felt still. I stayed on the ladder and kept working. I didn't rush. I didn't want to show anything on my face. "Signal looks good," I said. "I'll mount the router here." "Take your time," he said. His voice sounded closer than it had a moment before. I stepped down from the ladder slowly and adjusted my position so I was facing both him and the door. He hadn't moved much, but he was standing slightly closer to the center of the room. "Actually," I said, keeping my tone even, "I left a tool in the van. I need a different bit for this mount." He tilted his head slightly. "Can't you use what you have?" "I could," I said, "but it'll be cleaner with the right one." I picked up my tool bag and walked toward the door. It opened easily when I turned the handle. He didn't try to block me. "I'll be right back," I said. "I'll be here," he replied. I walked down the hallway at a normal pace. I didn't run. I didn't look back. When I stepped outside into the sunlight, the brightness felt sharp after the dim interior. I walked straight to my van, set my tool bag inside, and got into the driver's seat. I locked the doors. For a few seconds, I just sat there, hands on the steering wheel, thinking about the closed bedroom door and how quiet the house had been. I picked up my phone and called Marlene. "Hey," I said, "I'm at the Mesa install. I'm not finishing it." "Why?" she asked. "He insisted on a bedroom install. Shut the door behind me while I was on a ladder." There was a pause. "Did he touch you?" she asked. "No." "Did he say anything inappropriate?" "No, but I'm not going back in." Another pause. "Okay," she said. "Mark it as customer refused standard installation location. We'll reschedule." "Send someone else?" I asked. She hesitated. "We'll figure it out," she said. In my side mirror, I saw him standing just inside the front door, watching. He didn't wave. He didn't step outside. He just stood there until I turned the corner. Later that week, I heard from another technician that the same address had come up before. He'd requested a female tech more than once. No one said much beyond that. After that job, I changed how I handled installs. If a customer insisted on a location that put me in a closed room, I called my supervisor before stepping inside. If something felt off, I didn't talk myself out of it. I stayed with the company, but I stopped ignoring small details. And I never went back to that house. In April of 2022, I got a call around mid-afternoon from a man who said he was locked out of his house in Sacramento. He sounded calm, not frantic, not embarrassed, just matter of fact. "I'm outside," he said. "Door won't open." I asked for the address, gave him a time window, and loaded up the van. The house was in a quiet neighborhood, single-story, small front yard, no cars in the driveway. When I pulled up, the man was standing on the porch. He was in his late 30s or early 40s, wearing jeans and a plain t-shirt. Clean cut. Nothing unusual about him at first glance. "You're the locksmith?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "You're locked out?" "Front door," he said. "It won't budge." I walked up to the door and tried the knob. It turned. I pushed lightly. The door opened. I paused and looked at him. "You said it wouldn't open?" I asked. He frowned slightly, like he was surprised. "That's strange. It wouldn't before." I closed it and tried again. It opened without resistance. "The deadbolt wasn't engaged," I said. He stepped closer to the frame and peered at it. "Maybe it slipped," he said. "It's been acting up." "That can happen. Misaligned strike plates, warped doors. I've seen worse." "So you don't need a lockout," I said. "No," he replied quickly. "I still want a new lock installed." That wasn't unusual either. People call for one thing and decide to upgrade once you're there. All right, I said. New deadbolt? Yes, he said. Something strong. I grabbed my tool bag and a box deadbolt from the van. Before I started, I did what I always do. I checked the existing hardware and the frame. The door itself was solid wood. The deadbolt was standard, nothing fancy. What caught my attention were the scratch marks around the strike plate on the frame. They weren't old wear from keys missing the slot. They were deeper, concentrated around the area where the bolt would slide in, fresh enough that the wood fibers were still pale under the paint. Have you had trouble with this before? I asked, pointing at the frame. He leaned in close beside me. Like what? He asked. These marks, I said. Looks like something's been pressed or scraped against it. He shrugged. Probably from when I moved in. The previous owner wasn't careful. The marks didn't look like moving damage. They were clustered and recent. I didn't push it. My job wasn't to investigate, it was to replace the lock. He stepped back to let me work, but he stayed near the doorway instead of giving me space, close enough that I could feel him behind me when I crouched. I positioned myself so my tool bag was between us and the open door. I always try to keep the exit clear. As I removed the old deadbolt, he started asking questions. How strong are these, really? He said. Depends on the model, I replied. The one I'm installing is rated for standard residential use. What if someone really wanted to get in? He asked. I kept my focus on the screws. Most break-ins aren't about brute force, they're about opportunity. He was quiet for a moment. What if someone was trying to get out? He asked. I stopped turning the screwdriver and looked up at him. Out? I repeated. Yeah, he said, like if someone was inside and panicking. He didn't smile. He didn't laugh like it was a joke. It's a deadbolt, I said. It works the same either way. He nodded slowly. While I was fitting the new latch into the door edge, he stepped inside and pushed the door closed. The sound changed immediately. The outside noise from the street cut off. Better to test it closed, he said. That's fine, I replied. I made sure I was standing between him and the door before I tightened the final screws. The interior of the house was dim. Curtains drawn, no TV on, no background noise. I noticed that the interior doors off the entry hallway were all shut. I hadn't paid attention to that when I arrived. Do you live alone? I asked, mostly to fill the silence. Yes, he said. I slid the bolt in and out a few times to check alignment. It's smooth, I said. No sticking. He watched my hands carefully. How secure is it? He asked. If someone's screaming on the other side. I looked up at him again. Against someone screaming? I asked. Just hypothetically, he said. If someone was making a lot of noise and you didn't want it heard. I set the screwdriver down slowly. It's a standard deadbolt, I said. It keeps doors closed. It doesn't block sound. He nodded, like he'd expected that answer. Good to know, he said. I finished tightening the last screw and handed him the new keys. Try it, I said. He locked and unlocked it a few times. It's solid, he said. I stepped toward the door. Anything else? I asked. He hesitated for a second. No, he said. That'll do. He paid in cash, exact amount, bills folded neatly. As I stepped outside, he remained in the doorway. Thanks for coming out, he said. No problem, I replied. I walked to my van and loaded my tools. Before I got in, I glanced back at the door. He was still standing there, holding the new keys loosely in his hand. The door closed behind him a moment later. I sat in the driver's seat and filled out the invoice on my tablet. Address. Time. Type of lock installed. Under notes, I typed, customer requested replacement despite door functioning. Scratch marks around strike plate. I considered adding more, but I wasn't sure what I'd be documenting. I've done plenty of jobs in houses that felt off for one reason or another. Usually it's just people being particular or anxious. This one stayed in my head longer than most. Not because of the new deadbolt, because the door had opened easily from the start. If your first day involved awkward introductions and bad coffee, congratulations, you survived better than these guys. Smash that like button, hit subscribe so you never miss the next nightmare, and tell us the biggest red flag you've ever ignored. And if you think the woods are calmer than a night shift, you haven't heard what waits past the tree line. Click now to watch 4 disturbing camping horror stories. Some places don't need walls to trap you. Thanks for watching. Stay alert, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.